I first watched Weathering with You after its Blu-ray release in May of 2020, and I believe in this hectic year, its themes and messages are more relevant than ever. Some viewers perceive the film to warn of the consequences for neglecting climate change. I beg to differ. Rather, I see this as Makoto Shinkai wanting to comfort the youth of Japan, and even the rest of the world, in the face of the climate crisis we are currently in, providing perspective to alleviate some of the guilt and hopelessness that the youth of today may feel in regard to the state of their society. Now this video will contain spoilers, so please watch the film before. But now let's try to identify Shinkai's message in Weathering with You. Well, I reckon he acknowledges the effort and connection that the youth of the world have with nature and earth. However, he also understands there exists other societal pressures that may concern the youth, and thus encourages the younger audience not to burden themselves with the weight of having to save the world. The film seems to accept the most likely outcome of the current shift in climate will be one of heavy impact on our current norms, and seems to be in the camp of adapting to changes rather than preventing. Firstly, in the film, elements of nature and weather are represented in a beautiful yet powerful light, and the youth are shown to experience an intrinsic connection to these forces, showing a strong care and value for their world, even in spite of the decisions that they make. This connection between the main characters and nature is shown at the beginning of the story, where Hina discovers an abandoned rooftop retaken by nature. She's greeted with the chirping of the birds upon her arrival. Even Horaka is shown playing in the rain, witnessing its power and beauty when we, the audience, are first introduced to him. Hina in particular embodies the love young people have for nature, as she is fully willing to sacrifice her life to stop the rain, exemplified when she's lifted away by the wind from what would have been a romantic moment with Horaka, symbolizing her cause against climate change, tearing her away from her personal life. Hina's character also represents an unyielding desire to preserve the earth, as she is seen praying 3 years into the future even as the rain endlessly falls. In spite of the character's desires to correct the weather, many references are made throughout the film that suggest the weather is controlled by a deity or a higher level of being, as affirmed by the use of the dragon's roar as a leitmotif whenever large weather events occur. This complements the allusions to dragons, which symbolizes rivers, nature, and weather in Asian mythology, suggesting that the weather, and by proxy the climate, has little regard for the will of man, and has always sporadically shifted on its own accord. These words are echoed by many wise old characters. For instance, the old man at the shrine says, "There is a thin thread linking us humans and the sky," the thin line representing a minute influence that humanity has in controlling the course of nature. Even Kasuki Suga, the mentor figure for Horaka, humors the idea that Horaka and Hina are to blame for the unceasing rain that falls on Tokyo, seemingly as a result of their unwillingness to sacrifice Hina's life. Even when the weather impacts his ability to connect with his daughter, Suga questions the perspective that young demographic may have on the guilt of not combating climate change. While the young may put blame and stress on themselves, from the perspective of the older generation, it's simply a natural occurrence with no one person at fault. By demonstrating the connection that the youth have to the world, Shinkai allows adults to empathize with the youth's feelings of their responsibility for the global climate crisis. And as he connects the weather events to heavenly powers, rationally out of the control of humans, he alleviates the guilt that young people may unrightfully bear. Shinkai recognizes the desire that youth may have to grow up and become independent, even in the face of mounting obstacles that the generations before did not have, such as the rising cost of living and uncertain economic stability, shifting the conflict away from larger global issues such as the climate, to the aspirations of the youth and justifying their priorities to live comfortable lives. An obstacle that recurs in the shadow of the main story is employability, which Horaka, Hina, and Natsumi all experience. The latter demonstrated through a short montage of her applying for jobs online with the repetition of the phrase, "You're my first company of choice," exposing her desperation to find a reliable career, all while cooped up in a car sitting just out of the rain, a feeling many Japanese young adults have as their prospect for finding well-earning jobs is overshadowed by older workers in their gerontocratic working environment, a struggle unfelt by the established middle-aged workers who were job hunting in Japan during the post-World War II Japanese miracle era. In the film, Horaka is shown to repeatedly come into conflict with the police, who carry authority and represent an older, more powerful group in society. In a particular scene, police chase after a nightclub owner, but when he is caught, the police aren't concerned with his shady treatment of young workers. Rather, they couldn't care less, highlighting the lack of regard for the same ideals that the old and in power share with the youth, paralleling the modern political climate in USA, which in an interview is said to have inspired parts of the film for Shinkai. Here, Shinkai raises the notion that the generations aren't aligned in ideology, and there are certain struggles that trouble the youth more so than the hard-to-perceive climate crisis. In the face of the conflicts between the external expectation of the youth and their internal struggles, Shinkai begs the question, is it too much to ask to be able to pursue a peaceful life at the cost of not having to save the world, when it's never been on the minds of those who came before? The director demonstrates this through the allusion to J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. Although the two protagonists of each story parallel each other even to a literal standpoint, both wandering the streets of big cities alone, discovering themselves and their purpose, the juxtaposition of their setting highlights how times have shifted when Horaka finally discovers his love for Hina. He simply wishes for it to stay, saying, "This is more than enough, so please, don't give us anything more and don't take anything away from us," encapsulating the desire to achieve a peaceful, humble life connected with loved ones, which many of the youth today aspire to have. Starkly contrasting the more consumeristic, classic American dream of the last generation, featured in Catcher in the Rye, revealing how modern ideals have shrunken. The decrease in aspirations also aligns with the pessimistic outlook many Japanese citizens share on the future of the world. In a survey conducted by the Pew Research Center, 76% of Japanese citizens believe that the future generation will be worse off compared to their predecessors, possibly as a result of the expected wealth disparities caused by automation. The OECD also reported in 2016 that Japanese teens were among the world's most depressed youth, believing that the world was becoming a worse place to live. Considering these same teenagers value working hard, helping myself get on in life, it is likely that Shinkai was motivated to encourage the Japanese youth to enjoy their innocent years more, rather than seek adult responsibilities as referenced in the film, where Hina literally lies about her age in order to be held accountable to take care of herself and her brother, sacrificing her education just to become independent. This mindset is later abandoned in the climax of the film, as Hina falls out of the sky with Horaka, sending Tokyo City into seemingly eternal rains, visually symbolized by how even whilst the camera is falling, the characters are actually rising from their own perspectives, showing how even as the world around you is in hardship, that cannot take away your own ability to enjoy yourself. The way I see it, this film focuses on the glimmers of sunshine amidst the constant rain, and that's the mentality Shinkai seeks to instate in the youth of today. In an era of pessimistic doomers and chaos in every direction, Weathering with You places value on everyone's well-being, and frames global catastrophes as an issue to be dealt with as it arrives, rather than a curse that has to be lifted. Makoto Shinkai simply wishes to allow people to feel good about themselves, regardless of all the strife in the world.